Awesome. Well, thank you all for coming out tonight. My name is Amanda Felk, and I work now at Dinosaur Hill Nature Preserve. I've been doing environmental education stuff for over a decade, and that's when I refuse to count any further than that, because I'm still 20, right? I can pass. Quiet. So I've actually gotten a chance to work with 4 different Michigan owl species as wildlife ambassadors in my past at a variety of different places. So owls are pretty close to my heart and to my sleeve. All right, so the owls of Michigan, first of all, there are, helps if you turn it on. I don't need IT for that. All right, so there's 11 different species of owls that can be found here in Michigan. The first 2 of them go against everything we know about owls. They're actually diurnal. So most of us know that nocturnal means most active at night, but even if we know that, a lot of times we don't realize that diurnal is the word for most active during the day. One of them is, now there's a little contention among birders whether you call it a snow owl or a snowy owl, but I prefer the snowy owl personally. I'm a fan of that sometimes why. So this bird is an owl that is active mostly during the daytime because where it lives is usually by the Arctic Circle. And does anyone know something about the Arctic Circle in daytime?
All the time.
There are times of the year where you don't have a night. So it doesn't make sense to hunt at night only if you don't have a night to hunt in, right? Another feature that it has, if you look at its talons, you can see it's got very kind of fuzzy looking feet to keep its feet warm when it's up in that Arctic Circle. When we look at the coloration, this one we know is a female because it's got that kind of dirty brown, dirty sludge of the ground snow, right? So that would be because it would be nesting on the ground. And so she would be guarding the eggs and have a little bit more dirt on her to keep her camouflaged, while her mate, the male, would be a pure white and would be flying over the snow hunting, doing more of the work. All right, so he would be kind of against the backdrop of the tundra. So they do come down here to Michigan throughout the state. It was a couple years ago. There was even one found. There were pictures in the newspaper. It was on a billboard on I-75 in Madison Heights. So these owls do come down here depending on how their population is working out. And they'll be down here for the winter because Michigan is south of the Arctic Circle. So just like some of our snowbirds fly down south to Florida, we are the Florida compared to the Arctic Circle. And doesn't feel like it today, does it? But it's all relative. All right, so then we also have the other diurnal one. If you look at this owl, it doesn't look much like an owl. It's called the northern hawk owl. Most of the time, if you did see it, you would probably just think you were looking at a hawk, unless you were right up close to it. Will also just has those large eyes, so you have to be pretty close and looking in his face in order to know that it's, in fact, an owl. Also has the furry feet. Some more barring and a lot of white. Also found further north, more likely to be found in the Upper Peninsula than around here. It's a bummer, but. Then, when we think about owls and we think about nocturnal, luckily there are 9, so the majority of them do what we think they will. So this one is a great gray owl. It's the largest species of owl found here in Michigan. They're kind of known for being a bit of a slow owl. When we listen to, let's see how this works. When we listen to their calls, we don't need to listen to the feeding call. So when we listen to their calls, they're kind of that who, but they're really deep and really slow. They are usually found in old growth forests. The best place in the United States to actually see this owl is actually in Minnesota. But we do have them up at the Upper Peninsula. All right. Then we have the long-eared owl. This one has these really long tufts of feathers up here. Now, there are quite a few owls that you might hear of where their names are horned or eared, but these are just pieces of feather. They do have a really cool special name for those feathers. They're called plumicorns. So now you know, and you'll be able to win all of your crossword competitions, right? You can use that on Scrabble all the time. It's a good use of a U without a Q. So the long-eared owl is an owl that we would find in rural areas, out in woodlots and places like that. It's not a suburban owl. We probably wouldn't find it here, but if we go just a little bit further north, we might start finding it when we have more farmland. Not to be outdone, we have the very, very original name of the short-eared owl. So again, it doesn't even look like he has any ears, any plumicorns there. But the short-eared owl is going to be found even more in field areas. So long-eared owls and short-eared owls are found in kind of the same regions of the state, but in different habitats within those regions. So if the long-eared is out in the orchard, the short-eared is going to be out in the cornfield. It's a great pair.
Are they about the same size?
The short-eared is a little bit smaller. The long, about the same weight. The long-eared is a little bit longer and thinner, and the short-eared is a little bit shorter and squatter, I'd say. And then we get into some of our more common owls. These ones are what we would call branchers. So they are young that are not quite fledgling. They're not ready to fly yet. They still have some of their baby feathers. And so they will start coming out and climbing the branches on their nest tree. So they'll be more climbers at that point than flyers. And so cute. The boreal owl, I'm sorry, I'm not there yet. The barred owl. Yeah, the barred owl. It's found all across the United States. Great horned owl is as well. But the fun thing about a barred owl, there's so many fun things, but one of the fun things about a barred owl is that they have different accents. So a barred owl from Alabama versus a barred owl from Michigan will have a shorter call than the one from Michigan. The southern ones have the short call, and the northern ones have the southern drawl, the northern drawl. It just seems weird to say. So the barred owl, you may have heard, there's a common phrase that people say that it sounds like they're saying something. And I'm going to play the call first, if everything cooperates here and I can juggle. And then I'm going to tell you what it says, and then I'm going to play it again, and you'll all nod. You might not hear it until... All right. So does anyone know what the phrase is? Yeah, go ahead and say it out. Who cooks for you? Who cooks for you all? Right. And so when I did work with these owls, that was what my common phrase is, I cooked for you. Better appreciate it. I warmed up that mouse. So that one's nice and short and sweet. Probably a southern one that was recorded. I don't know for sure. But sometimes those Michigan ones just go on and on. They really need the chef's kiss. If we notice something really striking about the barred owl is when we look at its eyes. Most of our owls are actually having yellow eyes. The barred owl has dark pupils or dark irises. It's just an interesting thing. I'm not sure if there's a reason for that. I haven't found any. I've looked into it. Haven't found any information about that yet. But someday, someone will find out why. The American barn owl. Now, this owl is not found very commonly here in Michigan anymore. It was definitely found a lot more before the state was settled, right? And mostly found kind of on the western side of the state. This one is known for having this kind of heart-shaped face, which is kind of fun when you think about the fact that these owls are hatched around Valentine's Day. So these ones are a barn owl. They like to live in hollow trees before there were barns around. And there's a fun story that we'll get to about them in a little while. So, teaser. All right. So then, also a resident in the Lower Peninsula only. You don't find barn owls up in the Upper Peninsula. And then the little Boreal Owl. So this one, I do include it because I'm hopeful. It's on our list of owls that have been found in Michigan because it's been found about 3 times. So a boreal owl lives in the boreal forests between the Arctic Circle and, Canada, lower Canada. So every once in a while, someone's found it in the Upper Peninsula, and I think one time in the Lower Peninsula perhaps as well. So we say it's eruptive because we're hopeful, and when there are a bumper crop of babies that make it to adulthood, then each owl needs to extend its range, and so they go a little bit further south, and we get lucky. Sometimes people get lucky enough to see them. I haven't yet, but one day. And then one that many of you, I heard you talking about owls amongst yourselves before we got started here. So this one's one that probably, if you've seen an owl, this is the one that you've seen. It's called the Eastern Screech Owl. There are 2 different owls here, but they're the same owl. They're both Eastern Screech Owls, same species, but about 30% of Eastern Screech Owls are the red phase, and 70% are the gray phase. And it just depends on what forests they live in. If you live in a forest that has a lot of trees that have red bark, you're going to make it a better living if you're red, right? And if you live in a forest that has a lot of trees that have gray bark, if you're in those shagbark hickories or those birch and the maples, then you're going to want to have some gray coloration. And then the sweetest little tiniest owl that's found here in Michigan, the saw-whet. Yes, I chose a picture where he's got a mouse tail sticking out of his mouth. So the saw-whet owl is a resident throughout, generally lives in pine forests, and they got the name saw-whet because back in the days of the lumberjacks, they used saws, right? And when you used a saw, you had to sharpen it. So it got it to be nighttime, and the lumberjacks would be out at the campfire, and they'd be telling stories and doing lumberjack things. And they would have to sharpen their saws for the next day. And another word for sharpening their saw is to whet it. And so, if you've ever heard someone whetting their saw, it has a low whistly noise that sounds a little bit like this. So when those lumberjacks were sharpening their saw blades, they would actually call these owls in. And these owls are only about this big. They fit in your hand. And so they would come in thinking that they had other owl friends there. And eventually there would be, right? Because they're still sharpening the saws. So more owls are flying in. And the lumberjacks would actually be able to go and, remember, they hadn't really seen a lot of people. They didn't know to be afraid. So they would actually go pick them up off the tree and, look at them and whatnot. There's no stories about them having owl sausages with their pancakes. So I guess it all turned out okay. Okay. So then what makes an owl an owl? Why is an owl not a pigeon? Why is an owl not a hawk? There are some really distinct features. Number one are those big eyes, right? So when we look at an owl's eyes, we think about most animals. We think about Halloween time when we see eyes in the store. What shape are they? They're round. They're eyeballs, right? That's what we call them. Eyeballs, because they're shaped like a ball, like a sphere. But an owl's eye is actually what we call a tubular eye. And so this is a really kind of funky shape that's wide at the back and kind of, like a cylinder on the top. And so this shape allows them to have really good eyesight when there's not a lot of light. The way that eyes work is that you need some light in order to see. The way eyes work is that light is reflected back from the back of the eye. And so that's why this shape really works well to reflect the maximum amount of light, because it's got such a large surface area. And so more light makes it back out. But every time you get something, you have to give something up, right? So these birds, they cannot do the old Felix the cat clock move. They can't move their eyes side to side like we can. In order to move their eyes at all, they have to move their whole head. So they have these special bones that are called sclerotic rings. And these sclerotic rings are what fixes their eye inside their skull. If they didn't have that, we get wobbly. And remember, this one's got a magnet inside, so it's even more stable than it would be without a sclerotic ring. And so their eye, without that, their eye could just kind of pop out. And so another adaptation that they have in order to be able to see things that are back here is, I should learn not to use my pockets. All right. So another thing that they have is a really flexible neck. They can turn their head, not all the way around, because then they would just kind of spin it off, right, like a screw. But they can turn and look over all the way behind them one way, back to the front, and then all the way behind them the other way. So they can get about 270 to 300 degrees of sight pretty quickly. And they can do that. Does anyone know how many neck vertebrae a human has? 7? I heard it over there. 7, yes. Does anyone know how many a giraffe has? 7, yeah. So the only mammals, I know it doesn't have to be about owls, but it's a really cool fact. The only mammals in the world that don't have 7 neck vertebrae are sloths and dugongs. They're related to a manatee. So every other mammal, from a shrew to you to an elephant, 7 neck vertebrae. It's pretty neat. But our owl friends actually have twice that. They have 14. So, pretty interesting thing. Awesome. Yeah, they have silent flight. So, with this big of crowd, usually I walk it around, but this time I'm going to let you guys kind of pass this amongst yourselves, and so it might take a while for those in the back to actually end up seeing it. But what we're going to see is on this great horned owl wing, if you look right along the edge there, on the very top feather, you see little fringes. And those break up the air turbulence, and it allows them to have silent flight. If you hear a turkey take off, if you hear a mourning dove, for crying out loud, every time I see a mourning dove, you hear. If you hear an owl, then you've got some super hearing, because you hear that, ma'am? Yeah. So we're going to just pass that, look at that, and pass it to your neighbor. Awesome. All right. So let me see. Got to make sure I do it in order, or else I'll forget something. They're beaks. Yeah, they have beaks. So this is something most birds have, right, as a beak. They have hooked beaks, which all raptors have, and they use that in order to eat their prey. But the really big thing that they use, their big weapon is going to be their talons. So talons grab the prey, and they do have special feet too. So most birds, all birds have 4 toes. Most of them have 3 in the front and 1 in the back. Woodpeckers and parrots have 2 in the front and 2 in the back. Owls are special because they usually have 3 in the front and 1 in the back, but they can turn this third one. So they can go between the 2. I believe, if I'm remembering it right, the word for that is zogodactyl. Or zygodactyl. Can never get my pronunciation right. Super cool. So if it ever happens that you find an injured owl and you want to take it to a wildlife rehabilitator and you have to, for some reason, handle an owl, just want to warn you, the talons are what you're looking out for. The beak is just a little pinchy thing, right? Because most of the time they're eating their food whole. And obviously you'd want to just use a big towel and kind of wrap it around it and put it in a box until you can get it to a rehabber. But still, the important thing is beak, not so painful. Personal experience. All right. So our 3 big owls, our 3 most common ones, are going to be our generalists. We think about owls we think about them eating mice, right? Some owls eat very specific things. Some of them prefer voles. Some of them actually eat things like caterpillars. There's a wide variety of things in their diet. Our great horned owl is one of the most common, one of the most, or I should say, one of the least picky. The great horned owl is known for eating skunks. Because remember, that beak doesn't smell, not a very good sense of smell. So, doesn't mind the taste of skunk. But we look at this bird, these guys weigh about 3 to 5 pounds. Anyone have any idea how much a skunk weighs? About 5 to 7 pounds usually. Yeah. Still bigger than this bird, right? So that's another case where they would have to use their talons to rip pieces off, and then they would swallow chunks. Still not great at chewing. They're still going to swallow those chunks whole. Yeah, this is kind of an an older mount. He's been a couple places.
The long ear?
They are.
I always thought they were the biggest.
They're not the biggest, but they are a little bit shorter. We've got a little bit of crossover, so there are some great horns that would be shorter than a long ear, some that would be taller, and a small long ear versus a tall great horned. Absolutely. And these ones would be much more bulky. The long eared is kind of a skinny, lean owl. Yeah, absolutely. So these ones can be found all over the place, and they have that deep hoot, usually in groups of 7, that you hear in all the movies. Every single time you hear an owl on TV, it's this one. Sometimes things naturalists do when other people are making them watch TV is you see how many different TV shows feature owls in the background of a nighttime forest. Every once in a while you get it in like a daytime forest shot. You're like, what's going on there? Yeah. So they do use their plumicorns in order to communicate with their others, both of their species and of other species. And they'll use them kind of as to be intimidating and also to be kind of territorial, again, intimidating, or just when they're curious about things. So this one's kind of a goofy mount, but yeah, but like this reaction of a plumicorn would be kind of like a, what's going on, right? We get a much better look at the talons here, not quite as fuzzy. And just in case you haven't heard it, if you haven't watched the miniseries Roots, then, just my little fun facts, just to get an idea of how long these animals can live. The great horned owl, the longest record, is at least 28 years. It was released as a juvenile from a wildlife rehabilitator, and then its corpse was found in Ohio just back in 2005. So 28 years. Are you guys going to laugh if I say, oh, that's older than me? Another really fairly common one, both across the United States and in Michigan, is the barred owl. Barred owls have been around. There's fossils that have been found 11,000 years old. It's pretty neat. Think about them being that old. They're called barred because of the barring across their feathers. Some people think when I say barred that it's B-A-R-D, like it's a Shakespearean owl. It'd be kind of cool if it was. Very cool owl. These ones are found, like I said, both in the South and here in all the way up to Michigan, all the way in Canada. These ones they're so cute. They have that round head and those dark eyes. But especially in the southern parts of their range, they'll even eat things like crayfish. So they're very adaptable. They'll eat fish as well, depending on where they live. They're usually found in marshy swamp areas. And if you've ever heard of out on the West Coast in Oregon and Washington, the spotted owl, they actually outcompete the spotted owl because they are generalists, and the spotted owls prefer certain foodstuffs that are less likely to be found. The barred owl? No, this is about the size of a barred. Yeah. Now remember, everyone looks bigger with their wings out, though. Yeah. So also the barred owl. Shoot, I forgot what I was going to say. Let's see. The longest one on record for these guys is about 24 years. And unfortunately, that record holder was banded in 1986 and then found entangled in fishing gear in 2010. So again, fishing gear, out hunting in those marshy, wet areas. That happens. There we go. All right. And then, this is the fun one. So then, my little friend, the Eastern Screech Owl, not a baby. So our Eastern Screech Owl kind of has a little bit of a misnomer in its name. So this one does have the plumicorns. They're just really tiny. And so this one makes a call. I don't think it sounds like a screech. I used to be able to actually do it. I worked with a blind one that actually taught me how to make his call, but it's been a while now. So does that sound like a screech? Sometimes, yeah, it's called a trill. So it's got that kind of repetitive melody, kind of like some toads have. Screech owls. Some people think it sounds like a pony neighing. Not very much like a screech at all.
They're coloring, some are brown or some are red for camouflage purposes.
Yes, yeah. So yeah, absolutely. Different tree barks. So that doesn't sound much like a screech at all. But when we think back, do you remember I said there was a story about a barn owl? If I told you, this is the sound of a barn owl. Much more like a screech, right? Yeah. So what happened was back when they were naming these owls, they saw this owl and they heard that noise. Because where would a barn owl be? In a barn or in a hollow tree. So you didn't see the owl that was making the noise. He got in trouble for what his cousins were saying. Happens to the best of us, right? The oldest, so smaller ones don't live quite as long, because when we're talking about what generalists these birds are, Eastern Screech Owls will eat small rodents. They'll also eat insects. They'll eat grasshoppers a lot of times as well. But when we go back to some of our bigger owls, I'm looking at you, great horned barred, they'll also eat smaller owls. So that is one reason why when we go out at night and we're looking for owls and we try to call them in, you always start with the smallest owl's call. Because if that screech owl could be sitting right behind you, but if you play a great horned owl call, is he going to come near you? No, he doesn't want to come to dinner. So, but if you're playing the screech owl call, then the screech owl could come flying in and be like, what's going on? Where's the other screech owl? Or the great horn could come in and say, I would like a snack. Who's going to be silly enough to advertise themselves? I'll eat you. And so then, one of the things that all birds of prey do it, but for some reason we are fixated on, when we get into elementary school, what do we dissect? Owl pellets. So other birds that eat meat will also make pellets. But owls are kind of known for it, and so it's the same process for anyone that is a meat-eating bird. And what you'll see, it's a good way to find a roost spot, right? So we look on the ground and we look for these weird little pellets that are made up of fur and bones. Sometimes it's frass, caterpillar poop. And sometimes it's any indigestible part of what they've been eating. We think about that barred owl down in the south eating crayfish. You're going to find some exoskeletons from the crayfish. It is not actually, it's not quite vomit, and it's not poop. It's its own thing because it goes in, and they have this kind of separated area before the stomach called the proventriculus. Gosh darn it. I practice it for hours every night. Proventriculus. Just got to say it fast. And so it goes in there, and then everything that's digestible passes into the stomach area, and everything that's indigestible stays in a little pouch up here called the crop. And it stays there. It takes about an hour and a half after they've eaten for them to cough up their pellet. It's similar to a hairball in a cat. So I will pass this around in its little baggie. There are some bones in there. And so a lot of times when we do look into these, not just when we're in elementary school, but all the time, anyone who finds one, come on, look at it. You can tell things. If it's a large one, it's going to be for a larger owl, usually. If it's a small one, it doesn't tell you anything, because it could just be a broken up one from a larger owl as well as a small one. But it will tell you what that particular bird's eaten. So looking for, usually skulls are the most easily identified, and you'll find rodent skulls have those orange teeth, and the shrews will have kind of a reddish orange in their back teeth. And it's pretty cool to see what they've eaten, especially if you find something. Occasionally you'll find bird skulls. Those are the really special ones. Sometimes you can even tell from the fur that's in it, because what does that great horned eat? Skunks. Yeah, so skunks have a pretty distinctive fur pattern, don't they? They have that black and white mix. So if you see black and white fur that's kind of striped around your pellet, it's a pretty good chance that it was from a great horned owl. So again, going owling is what we're going to say we do when we go out and we're calling owls. Most of the time I go owling, it's going to be in the wintertime because that's when they're attracting their mates. That's when they're most likely to call back, because they either think that you're an owl of the opposite sex and they want to get to know you better, or they think you're an owl of the same sex and they want to beat you up. So either way, you get a reaction, right? And again, you always start with the smallest owl, because if you use the big ones, you'll scare the little ones away. And just remember that if you do this, you can get owl recordings on the Audubon app. You can get these recordings, but we only play 1 or 2 times a particular call in a particular spot, because these owls are responding to what they think is either territorial dispute or a mate. We don't want to mess up their chances with a real mate, right? Because they're busy with us. I did an owl walk in the woods, and it was the only time, I'll be honest, you go out owling, you can go out 20 times. Know how many owls you'll likely see? 0 to 1. You might hear one off in the background calling back, but that could be some other fool with a recorder too. So you have to take it with a little bit of a grain of salt. I personally, anytime I hear something that, if I see my friends and I know that they're not actively making calls, then I'm going to count it as an owl. But I've been out there, and it was so exciting. It was peak naturalist moment. I was out on this walk leading a group of 20, and I decided, remember I said that I had a screech owl that taught me how to do the call? I did it by my voice, and I had an owl, a screech owl, answer me. I was like, oh my gosh, he's actually answering me. So I turned, I step back a little bit. I hear him again. He's getting closer. He was in a tree. He kept coming closer. I didn't even call again. And he just kept coming closer and closer. And this poor owl was so desperate for love, and I could not provide it to him. I felt so bad. So even once or twice, you can still feel a little guilty about it, right? You can try to attract owls to your own backyard by building a nest box. This would be one for a screech owl. It's about 12 inches by 12 inches by 14, probably deep, is perfect for a screech owl. It's also perfect for American kestrels, southern flying squirrels, several other types of birds. But any kind of raptor, I'm excited. If I get a kestrel in my owl box, I'm not going to complain, right? So you can do that. Just be aware that they are territorial, so don't put it right above your driveway and expect not to get dive bombed. So it should be about 15 feet away from wherever you're going to travel. Screech owls, because they are so small, screech owls are about the ones that I would suggest putting a box up for. Also, a lot of our other owls, you can build a box that's a little bit taller version of this, a little bit wider for the barred owl as well. Great horns they're not cavity nesters. They don't use hollow trees like the screeches, and the bards sometimes do. So they are platform nesters. If everyone's ever been out to, what are they calling it these days? Lake St. Clair Metro Park. And they have, I think, a laundry basket out there as a platform. They would usually use nests that are built from other birds. But really cool to see. You definitely don't want a great horned owl dive bombing you in protection of its young. And the other thing is that you'll want to so if my nest box is up on my tree over here, I'm going to put it about 12 feet up in the air. But I would want some kind of perch where the parents can come and watch the kids so they're not throwing wild parties when they're away. Right. The other thing that I think is important to say when we're talking about owls is when we think about what owls eat, there are things that we don't necessarily want in our backyards, right? We want the owls there maybe, but we don't want the mice or the rats or some other kind of rodents. But the idea is to let the owls do their job. You let the owls take care of the pests. If we poison and we put rat poison or mouse poison down, these are some of the other things that have directly eaten rat poison itself because they add coloring and attractants and smells and things to the rat poison. This one is pretty worrisome, right? So that's a whole nother program. So all of these animals will eat rat poison if given a chance. And we have to remember that once those animals have eaten the poison, something's going to eat them, and that poison doesn't just go away. So anyone eat this? That makes it a little worrisome, right? And we think about animals that may eat this or this, are also ones like our foxes and our mice. Anyone eat that? Yeah, so it can go up the food chain, and it's pretty awful. So if you can, the most humane way to take care of pest control, obviously, is to wait for an owl. That takes a little time, right? And it has a lot to do with what your neighbors are doing. But the most humane way is really to use snap traps. It's the best for the other wildlife in an area. All right. So I do have a little bit of time for questions, I think. Yes? You could put your barn owl box inside your barn. You could put it even facing outside the barn as well, just like against the barn. Just something that's kind of flat along the back. and just a box like that. There's some people make fancy barn owl ones that are kind of a trapezoid shape or a triangle shape. You can give that a shot too. So that's really super interesting. Our common guys, some of them do, some of them don't. Like individually, they're kind of like robins. Like some of them stay the whole year here, some of them move on. Really interesting. You can do that when you're a generalist, I guess. Yes?
What happens if an owl bites you?
If an owl bites you, you say ouch. You want to take a look at my fingers? Do you see any scars there? Every one of them has been bitten by an owl. Yeah, in fact, I've had turtle bites are a lot worse. It's a big pinch is what it is. In fact, when I worked with owls, in order to trim their beaks, which is something you have to do when they're in captivity, one of the things that you have to do, and this is when you really know that you have to work with owls, right, is you have to put your thumb inside their beak to keep them from choking on the little grindings from using the Dremel on their beak. Yes? The most common is probably going to be our Eastern Screech Owl, just because of its size. So a smaller owl needs less space to live in, so there can be more of them, right? So if we've got an acre of land, we might fit 2 great horns. You have that same acre of land, you can fit about 10 Eastern Screech Owls. Yes?
Do they have predators? What eats them?
Yeah, well, anything bigger than them. That's the way nature works, right? So if they were on the ground for some reason.
So would like a coyote?
Yeah, absolutely. A coyote, even a raccoon, if they were on the ground, if something happened to their wing and they couldn't fly, or if they were just distracted by something else, sometimes maybe if a great horn is trying to rip up that skunk, a coyote, a fox, a raccoon could be interested in eating the skunk, be like, why not? No one's going to pass up a free meal. That's the way the wild works. Yeah, absolutely. Beck?
In our backyard, we put up bird feeders, and sometimes squirrel comes and different birds and cardinals and other birds and something smaller and stuff. So if I put an owl box in my backyard, how will that work? Will it drive away the birds or like the squirrels?
Well, see, the owls they're usually going to be hunting at nighttime. So if your squirrels are going to be most active during the day, so they may end up eating a squirrel here and there, but it's not too common. Just night shift and morning shift, right? Yes, sir.
Yeah, we have a Screech Owl box, a nest box in our backyard, and we've had it for 3 or 4 years now. And every winter, we have an owl. But we've never had Screech Owl babies in the box. Is there anything, is that just luck, or is there something about the box that discourages that, or
Have you ever cleaned out the box? Do you have? Just luck of the draw, I guess.
Okay.
Maybe it might be the same owl coming back, and maybe one of them is infertile. Sometimes that happens too. Maybe they're just older owls looking for a retirement box, Yes.
So we actually found an owl in our backyard that was a little hatchling, and it had been mauled by something. And we called Rochester Hills. I think they have animal control, and nobody wanted to take the owl. And by the time we went back to the backyard, it was gone. So we're just wondering if we ever see one again because we live off woods.
Yeah.
Is Dinosaur Hill a good option?
Dinosaur Hill is not a wildlife rehabilitator, so a lot of people call nature centers with this very question. The best thing I can tell you is to think about it now. There's an app and a website called Animal Help Now, and this app works, and the website, either version, it covers the entire United States, and you can search by animal and by zip code and find the wildlife rehabilitator that is closest to you that accepts that animal. Because you have to remember, wildlife rehabilitators are licensed by the state. They don't receive any funding from the state, so they have to put limits on what they accept, right? So some of them only accept owls, some of them accept turtles. You know, there's a little niche for every animal out there. Absolutely. Yes.
My question is similar to that, Jenna. We actually did have babies in our Screech Owl box.
Yay.
So we had owls in there for about 5 years, and the last year babies. But then the last few years, nothing's been in there except squirrels and starlings. So would that be a deterrent that there was somebody else living in their box? Or like you said, is it just the luck of the draw?
I think it's just kind of the luck of the draw. And again, it might have been like the same owls using that box, and then something happened to them, and no one's come and taken that territory yet. Or they might have, unfortunately, found somewhere they liked better. Sometimes that happens too. Yes.
Do screech owls primarily come back to the same trees every night?
So when it's not breeding season, they're more likely to be a little bit more nomadic. They'll have the same area that they live in. They're a little more tolerant of others being in their area, but they don't really like stay in the same spot all the time unless they have a nest to go to. So they'll have like maybe 5 or 6 trees, and they kind of make the rounds.
We went to a little, what prompted that question, we went to a little presentation about wildlife. And it was at Spencer Creek, Spencer Park, and they covered snakes, turtles, lizards, a few. The highlight of the evening was the hayride to go out, and the keynote speaker, Lance DeVoe, I'm sure you know, he turned around and he said, would anybody like to see owls? And I was convinced at that point that he had some artificial owl.
An animatronic up there, one of those little scare the crows away one.
So the tractor's chugging along, and he has the driver shut it off. We got out, and he takes his big flashlight and he puts it up in the tree. Probably 20 feet away from us, there's a pair of screech owls just sitting there looking at
Yeah,
us.
so a pair, you know what time of year it is, do you remember?
I guess it was early fall.
Yeah, so that's just when they're starting to pair off and start thinking about
Yep.
love. Yes? I'm sorry, can you repeat that just a little?
Only 2 of the 11 owls nocturnal.
2 of them were diurnal, so most of them were nocturnal. Yeah, so those ones, again, are ones that live where sometimes it's not night for over a month. So you can't make a living as a nocturnal animal there, right? Because there's just no nighttime to hunt in. Yeah, absolutely.
When an owl gives birth, how many are in
The clutch? Yeah, so the clutch. It's like a litter for egg-laying animals. Yeah, so it depends a little bit on species, but I'd say generally it's about 3, and they're laid at different times usually. So there's egg 1, 3 days later there's egg 2, a couple days later there's egg 3. And this will happen because that way if something happens and there's not enough food, then there's a bigger one that's going to get all the food, right? So that way they don't have to, like, luck of the draw, the parent doesn't know which one to feed. You feed the bigger one, it's got the most success rate, best success rate.
Would an owl eat a raccoon?
Absolutely. In the wild, you would eat whatever you can find. Usually the raccoon would have to be already sick, not feeling too well for the owl to think it's worth it. But yeah, if they found one that was down on his luck, if it was hit by a car or something, the owl would definitely, maybe not this guy, but one of our great horns or one of the bigger ones. Even a bard might think twice. But yeah, if he wasn't getting around too well. All right. Yes.
In a nest box, is there generally just one screech owl per nest box, or are they in there in pairs?
They're in there in pairs, so it's usually a male and a female. Maybe that's the problem with you're not having young too. It happens. And so they, they'll be the pair. The female for most owl species is going to be the bigger of the 2, and that's going to be the one that sits on the nest, and the male will have to do all the hunting. And so when we think about, we go back to that little cute heart-shaped Valentine owl, the barn owl with that horrible, horrible love song. That sounds like a banshee. So when we think about that, he's going to go and catch field mice. And he's got to feed the mother of his children, right? And then he can feed all of his kids, which could be, for that particular kind of owl, that could be 3 to 5. So he might have to go out and go to the store and pick up 27 field mice and still not get a single one for himself. Because he's not allowed to eat until everyone else has been fed. Ah. All right, yes.
A few years ago, our church had a problem with bats.
I wouldn't say that's a problem, personally.
Well, the Joint Interest Center advised that we put up a bunch of these, but we wanted faster results than that, so we hired a critter getter, and he took care of the bats pretty quick. But you didn't mention bats as a food source for the owls. I was curious about that.
So if you're an owl, then you can fly around all over the place, right? You're flying and you're flying and you're flying, and you can snag all of these animals that are stuck on the ground. Or you can find another flying animal that's flying all over the place and can move over here and can use echolocation and avoid something as thin as a single strand of human hair or a single spider web in the darkness. I'm going for the mouse that's stuck on the ground. So bats are not, they're not a main food source. They are up at the same time, and they are the right size. So if they get lucky, they'll give it a shot. But they're so good at avoiding predators, at least owls. Bat predators, I would say, are more things like snakes and hawks, because snakes and hawks will figure out where the bat roosts are. They're getting ready for bed, and the bats, they know the bats are going to start coming up. They'll stay up a couple minutes early, hang out right where the bat roost is. Snake will hang down. As soon as the bat comes up and wakes up, boom. Hawk, sitting on a tree, knows where the bats are living. As soon as those bats start flying, phew, easy meal. Yeah.
They don't come out just one at a time.
Right, yeah, exactly. So, well, usually when there's big colonies of bats, I turn everything into a bat program. I can't stay on owls. So when there's big colonies of bats, right, hundreds of bats, somebody draws the short straw every night, and it has to be, hey, you guys, get out there.
You go first.
Yeah, exactly, right? So less so here in Michigan, because most of our colonies are kind of in the hundreds, but I went down to Texas and saw the big 2.5 million Mexican free-tail bats at Congress Avenue Bridge in Austin, Texas. Lots of snakes hanging from the bridge, like the underside. Lots of hawks that just kind of sit on the post, wait for those first few to come out. But again, that's millions of bats, and 2 or 3 get eaten. So, yes, sir.
Can owls take upside down?
So it's funny that you ask that. They can. In the wild, it hasn't been observed, but a lot of times in captive owls, they have been known kind of to just hang upside down from their perches every once in a while, particularly. There's a great book. I'm at a library. I have to mention a book, right? There's a great book called Wesley the Owl, and it talks about a woman who had a captive owl. She worked at Caltech, and she had this owl. I mean, it's illegal to have one, except for with the proper permitting from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. But since she worked for an educational facility, she was allowed to have it. So she had this owl basically as a pet, and she did like some research with it. Not invasive, just kind of like, I don't know, what it eats and what its life was like. And in that book, she mentions several times where he just kind of hung upside down for no particular reason. Could be. Yeah. Sometimes you might have seen on the internet, sometimes they show that picture of like an owl that's face planted on the ground. Have you ever seen that with his legs out behind him? Yes.
Is there ever like a right time of the year to like build an owl house?
Yeah, so with any kind of wildlife houses, that's a great question. My suggestion is to just build it, right? You build it when you think about it, because if you don't build it when you think about it, then you're like, I'll build it in the spring. I'll build it in the fall. I'll never get around to it. So you build it when you think about it. You put it up as soon as you can. That way, the one in your garage is never going to have an owl in it, right? The one in your garage is never going to, your bat house in the garage is never going to have a bat in it. The Eastern bluebird box in the garage, never going to have a bluebird in it. But if you build it and you put it up, number one, it's going to have time to not smell like people. Any kind of paints that you put on it, any kind of chemicals, any kind of treatment that's in the wood is going to start to wear off those scents from being outside. And so it'll be more attractive to them. So you build it and put it up and don't procrastinate.
What wood is recommended, cedar or pine?
I would recommend it. Yeah, cedar. Cedar's a great wood that holds up really well. I recommend it for all kinds of wildlife housing. It also can often have a good, a good repellent for parasites. Yeah, for external parasites.
Just as a thought, you're with Dinosaur Hill, right?
Yes.
And I can only imagine with the amount of people that are in this room, there's an interest in owls. Has Dinosaur Hill ever reached out to OPC, to the wood shop, to see if anybody would like to volunteer building the houses and people just pay for the lumber?
So I've been there since September. So I got plans. We also get a lot of Eagle Scout projects that like to build kits for us that we can do programs and have people come. And, y'all are invited to come and join us for an owl building kit sometime, right? So we do programs at Dinosaur Hill, much like this one, but on a little bit smaller of a scale because I don't think I could fit all of you in my building at once. But definitely, we do programs kind of like that, and come out and build an owl box and whatever other kind of animals too. Yeah, I'm definitely. I used to work at Organization for Bat Conservation, is where I got a lot of my owl experience from, and bats. That's why it's kind of my personal joke that I turn everything into a bat program. But nocturnal animals are my most passion. I love all nature, obviously, but yes.
If you're an owl and you want to try to go see it, what's the best approach?
Oh, man. Your best approach is going to be really happy that you heard it. Flashlights aren't great. If you have really good hearing and you can tell where it is, then go towards where you think it is. But honestly, just hearing one is amazing. You're so lucky if you hear it. I mean, I guess you could potentially go to the pet store, get some frozen mice, start putting a bird feeder out. Your neighbors won't like you very much, but if you know there's an owl in the area, it's possible that it could start coming to your feeding station. But a lot of neighborhood associations will say that's not the kind of bird feeder we meant. Yes.
Have you ever seen an owl before?
Oh, have I seen owls? I've seen one time before I was even a naturalist. I was up north with some friends, and I saw this shadow go over the road that we were walking along, and it was an owl. You just know, right? Because you don't hear anything. That's what another thing I forgot to mention when we go owling is that also if you're going owling with me, then what we're going to do is I'm going to play this sound. I'm going to be looking in this direction. You're going to be looking in that direction. You're going to be looking in that direction. You're going to be looking in that direction. Because we're not going to hear them fly in, right? So if they don't call back and they just fly in, it would be really embarrassing to be playing the call. The owl's right here, but everyone's looking in that direction, right? And you don't even know that you missed it, right?
Do you know why in folklore they were associated with healing?
I'm not sure because it depends on which group you're thinking of, because they've run the gambit, right? So some people have associated owls with witchcraft, some with healing, some with death. They think that that's where the story of Mothman came in, is from the barred owl face. You just got out of the shower and you see this looking at you in the window.
Oh.
It takes you a little back, right? Yeah. Yes. The best owl house to make? I'd say the Screech Owl, because again, number one, you build the Screech Owl house, you don't get a Screech Owl. Worst case scenario, you still get some cool animals. Because there's a lot of them. I always hope for either a Screech Owl or a Kestrel. Southern flying squirrels are really cool too. A lot of different animals will use that. So it's pretty useful, even if you don't get what you really wanted.
How common are kestrels around here?
I'm sorry.
How common are kestrels around here?
I saw my first one at Bloomer Park last summer. So it was my first time at Bloomer Park. So I haven't really done a lot around here, but that was the only kestrel I've seen so far. But it was here. It was just down the road. So really cool. Yeah, awesome. Yes. At Dinosaur Hill, I have historic reports that people have anecdotally told me that they've seen a great horned owl there before. At least one or two of them I trust, right? But I personally haven't seen any yet. I keep trying, and I keep hoping. That's what you gotta, just keep hoping. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, other than the ones that are in the enclosures, right? Yeah. Yeah, because I think there was a wild one that tried to... So the ones that are at Stage Nature Center are actually ones that I worked with when I was at Organization for Bat Conservation. So the old girl Autumn, I think she had a wild one that was trying to pick her up, kept leaving her some mice presents. Yeah. Yes.
My daughter lives downtown and just 2 blocks off of the trail, and I was trying to look for the photo. 5 evenings in a row, there were 3 little owls sitting on the wire, and they'd be there for 15 minutes, and unless my granddog came out, then they'd go away, but 15 minutes, 5 nights in a row. And there was...
And this was recently?
It was, I think, 2 summers ago, whenever
okay.
time of year was the warm time.
That was around summertime, like...
Yeah, and they were, little guys, absolutely adorable.
Yeah.
But there was one, whether it was the mom or whatever, just down the street, a bigger one in the tree, and I got to see that one. But again, that one came back twice, 2 years in a row, and again, it's just a few blocks from here.
Yeah, so those are, that sounds like branchers into fledglings. So they've started to fly on their own a little bit. They hang out on the wire. Dad still comes to feed them.
Okay.
Yep.
What time of day was that at night? Was that at night?
In the evening, it wasn't late. I walked over, and it was like dusk, and I was able to see them there. And then
Did you say, are owls good pets? No, it's completely illegal to have them as a pet. You cannot. It is a federal law. So you will go to jail and be fined thousands of dollars. Does that sound like a good pet? And I'll tell on you. Now, if you're in the UK, if you are Harry Potter, then you are allowed to have an owl as a pet. But here in the United States and in Canada, it is illegal to own any part of an owl, including a single feather. Because of the 1915 U.S. Migratory Bird Treaty Act, Bird Act Treaty, whatever order the word's going. Back in 1915, it was a Migratory Bird Act. Yes, Bird Act. So any migratory bird, and remember, some of them migrate, some of them choose not to. You can't have any kind of feather because they don't know if that feather came from a living or a dead bird, and if you killed the bird in order to get that feather. So they err on the side of the birds. Never mind the fact that they get large fines if they catch you with it. With the exception of Native Americans, who are allowed to have migratory bird feathers for their spiritual ceremonies, but even they have to go through the feather repository, and so they have to apply for those feathers and prove that it's for a ceremony. And you can't just, oh, I know someone who's a Native American, here you go, right? Yes?
Do you know if Native Americans ever use owl feathers for punching on arrows for archery?
I don't know if they have. I would imagine that they pretty much figured out that it would be silent flight. If they had a reason to want to have silent arrows, right? So they probably wouldn't be using that for hunting, but maybe for defense. That's just my feeling about it. I haven't heard anything. Yes?
Yeah, I understand that brown bat populations are being affected by a fungus, and I just wonder if there's any parasites or other things that are affecting any of this Michigan owl species.
The biggest parasites? Not really a parasite. The biggest problem that owls face are us. Yeah. So our roads at night. So there's the story of the apple core, right? So a lot of time what happens is they think, oh, I've got this apple core. I'm done eating it. It's gonna compost, right? It's gonna break down. I'm just gonna throw it out the car window. Rolls next to the street. Mouse comes to eat that apple core. Owl comes to eat that mouse. Car comes, hits the owl. A lot of the owls that are brought in for wildlife rehabilitation have been hit by a car, and a lot of times what happens is either through trauma or through the antenna on the car, they will lose one eye. And so at the very least, sometimes owls with one eye can be released back into the wild, but at the very least, they're out of commission. They're not out there eating mice for a good 3 to 6 months while they're healing, right? All right. Well, if there's no more questions. I did say that we could go outside for a little bit and try to call some owls. I don't think we really have a lot of time for that, but I want to thank you all for coming and invite you to come visit me at Dinosaur Hill. We do have open hours on Fridays and Saturdays from noon till 5. You can check out our ambassador animals and come talk to me about owls and bats and any animal you can think of. And maybe if you want to talk about a plant, I might talk for a few minutes about it. Yes. Programs at Dinosaur Hill? Well, you can go to our website, dinosaurhill.org.